Everyone, welcome back. So today I'll be covering round 13 of the Candidates Tournament, and I'll be looking over the game between Hikaru Nakamura and Jan-Krzysztof Duda. Now, at the time of this recording, I haven't seen Hikaru's recap, so I have no idea if I'm missing any information here. I'm sure Hikaru would give his own game a lot of justice, more than I can. But I'll just go straight into it. So the game started with e4, c5, a Sicilian. I think Duda wanted to probably end this tournament on a high note, so he was probably gunning for a win. Knight f3, d6, and here we go into a Najdorf with a6. Bishop e3, e5, knight f3, and a lot of other games. Knight b3 is played, and that goes into the English attack. Instead, knight f3 was played here. Bishop e7, h3 just to prevent bishop g4. h6 just to prevent bishop g5. Now, black's idea here is to play d5 at some moment, or even start some sort of queenside initiative with b5, b4. But in most cases, black would really like to get this move d5 in. It's a very freeing move, and if black can achieve that, then he has equalized. Achieve that safely. You can get d5 in but lose material. So, anyways, bishop c4 was played. Bishop e6, and now bishop e3. The reason this wasn't taken is because this would actually help black in achieving d5, because now the e-pawn is here. So after bishop e3, knight c6, Hikaru prepared knight h4, and now the threat is to take on e6 and then play knight g6. Duda allowed this with knight a5. And now bishop takes e6, pawn takes, and now knight g6. Now black has to play the rook somewhere to g8. h7 is really not that good. And black has lost all his castling rights. So he can try to castle queenside, but he'll probably get attacked on the semi-open c-file and on the queenside. There are some dark squared weaknesses here. So for the moment, black will probably have to stick around in the center and maybe tuck his king with king f7, king g8 at some point. So Hikaru castled. Knight c4 hitting the bishop. Black would really like to get this bishop off the board, because that would make black's task of equalizing a lot easier. So Hikaru plays bishop c1. It looks a little strange to put the bishop back on the starting square, but the bishop will reroute into the game anyways. Rook c8, very logical, eyeing up the c2 pawn. And now h4. And I think Hikaru's idea here was just to basically plant the knight on g6 and park it with h5 at some point. That way the knight cannot be touched. He could have also just played b3 immediately. And here black can actually has this interesting tactic with knight e3, because it attacks the c3 knight. And if this is taken, then just rook takes. And you can see how black might try to gun for the c2 pawn. But white can just play bishop d2 very calmly, and after something like rook c6, he can just go for c4 and clamp down on the d5 square. Or black doesn't have to go in for this. He can just play knight a5 here, and after bishop b2, knight c6, the game goes on. I still think white is actually a bit better here, not just because of the computer evaluation, but because the king is in the center, and black has this weak e6 pawn, which will become vital in the game later. But anyways, h4 was played. I think Hikaru was trying to be a little more ambitious here. So rook c6, black goes with this plan of just putting the rook here, probably playing queen c7, moving the king, and maybe rook c8 at some point. Or rook d8 or rook e8. Really depends on what white does before the rook on g8 moves. For the moment, the rook on g8 is pretty passive. So queen f3 was played. And this idea is not only to cover this pawn, but to also maybe start transitioning to h3, where it would hit the e6 pawn. So king f7 just to defend that pawn. Now queen h3 is not really a threat. h5 was played just to guard the knight. The knight is now very secure on g6. In some cases, maybe this could be a weak pawn, but right now it isn't. So queen c7, black just keeps going with his plan to, double on the c-file, maybe eye up the c2 pawn. And now knight d1. This is actually a pretty good move, because the knight is actually not doing anything too important here. He's not covering any. He can't go to any of these squares, and it's probably time to reroute the knight. So knight d1 is a good move. White also had this interesting possibility to play here g4. It looks kind of crazy to do, but after something, let's say, like rook d8, let's say black tries to play this natural move, rook c8, rook d8, truthfully doesn't make a difference. Actually, rook e8 should probably be played just to cover the e6 pawn some more. But let's just say rook d8 for, just as an example. King h1. The idea is to play rook g1 and then g5, and that's a really, really annoying attack on the black king. So d5 is played to break open the center, rook g1 anyways, and after this, king e8 is played to avoid anything with g5, because this pin will become very, very frustrating. So let's say king e8. If king g8, then you can take this, and after takes, you can play g5 here. And this is actually pretty annoying. So instead, king e8, which at least tries to get out of the king side where the rook will be perfectly placed to attack the black king. And after this exchange, you can actually just win this pawn. Of course, black doesn't have to play like this. He can always also take with the g-pawn and play that way. But anyways, this is actually a very interesting position where white can try to push this g-pawn, create a passer, or use this h-pawn and create a very strong pass pawn here. This is not a very comfortable position for black to play, especially because he can't enter on d2. This is covered, and attacking the white queen side might take some time. I mean, you could take here, but then after g5, this gets really messy. Like, you're going to have to worry about these two pawns here. But anyways, that is a very interesting possibility. I was just looking at that and thought maybe g4 is possible. A pretty risky move because white is exposing his own king, and it should be calculated very carefully. But knight d1 instead, the knight wants to hop into e3, where it will influence the g4 square and also cover the c2 pawn, so that this battery on the c file becomes a little less useful. Knight b6, just preempting b3. Knight e3, now the c2 pawn is very nicely guarded. And now knight bd7. A pretty mysterious move, but basically black needs to reorganize, recycle his knight to the king side, because it's not doing much here anyways. I was looking at d5 briefly, but then the move knight g4 is extremely annoying, because you never know when this e-pawn might be weak. And if, let's say, something like bishop d6 here, you could just play rook e1, and it's really not comfortable because the king is on f7, the rook is on g8, and it's just a very exposed position for black to play. Still interesting though. d5 could have been tried. It would have been interesting to see how that went. So knight d7, knight bd7, and now c4. Basically, Hikaru just wants to clamp down on d5, make sure that this move is discouraged and not even possible. There are 4 things aiming at d5. So knight f8, and this is just to try to exchange off the knight on g6. And here, Hikaru played knight h4 just to avoid that exchange. Truthfully, he could have even actually allowed it, because after queen h3, if this is exchanged and this is taken, queen takes e6 is very annoying, and you could see how this king is kind of loose on g6. An interesting possibility here, but that's not how the game went. Black can try to take on e4 here, but then, f4, and suddenly the rook joins the game. So a pretty complex position here. Knight h4 was played just to keep some pieces on the board. I don't think Hikaru wanted to exchange, or maybe he just didn't see this idea with queen h3 at the time. So knight h7, with the idea to just put the knight on g5 and pack the king side. You could see how the black king is actually finding some security here. b3 was played just to hold this pawn, but to also put the bishop on either b2 or a3, depending on how black sets himself up. Knight g5, queen e2, and now the black wins a pawn here. But black, if you look at the bar here, black is not a pawn better. He is not +1 here, because this king is still exposed, and it's hard for black to actually free himself because d5 is not really possible at the moment. So bishop b2, and if something like d5 in this case, this can be taken, and let's say takes, and actually now you can just play it takes. And this knight is loose. So that's why d5 cannot be played here. So rook e8, just to defend the e6 pawn. This is a good move. Now, why not something like rook c8? Well, because basically white can just come back to g6, and at some moment, maybe play f4, and you never know, this e6 pawn might become a target at some point. So basically, rook e8 is a good move. Knight g6 was played anyways, and now king g8. The king has tucked himself away safely. This e6 pawn is no longer under attack, and white doesn't really have the queen h3 resource where it can hit the e6 pawn. So the king is safe on g8. So rook a d1, and it looks like black is actually fine here. Black is not only a pawn up, but he has a pretty tough center. The knights look good. Sure, this battery looks a little bit strange with, c4 blocking it, but black is going to have b5 resources eventually. And then, you never know when the rook might come down to c2. So actually, black is doing great here. You can just play around this knight on g6. It's not that much of a bother, especially because that's the only piece on black's king side. White doesn't really have any good way to break through. So a5 was played here, and this is just starting an initiative on the white queen side. He wants to play a4 at some point, play b5, get rook c2 in at some point. And this becomes very annoying for white to deal with, because if he gives up any of these, if the queen side collapses, then black will have so many resources. These files may open, d5 might become a real possibility. Not at the moment, though, e5 will hang. But yeah, so it's just a little bit difficult for white to find a good plan here. He really doesn't want to play f3 because you're just going to run into knight g3, so you can't kick that knight easily. So white decided, well, Hikaru decided to exchange pieces here. Probably not a bad idea. You don't really want to exchange pieces when you're a pawn down, but it's hard to suggest a good move here. If something like rook d3 is tried, after something like bishop d8, which just covers the e6 square, a very calm move. Let's say white tries to double. Knight c5 is really annoying, and you can see how black's knights are just very coordinated. The center is actually very hard to break down. White doesn't have any good pawn breaks. If, for example, something like f4 was played, now knight g3, you can't really move that pawn, and this knight is a very annoying nuisance. So knight g4, and now bishop d8, again, just guarding the e6 pawn. The bishop on d8 looks a little awkward, but it allows the rook to guard the pawn. And now knight takes f6, Hikaru exchanges pieces here and plays rook d2. And the idea is to just, double up here, try to attack d6. Something fell over there. It was probably a cat doing something, so don't mind that. Knight d7 was played. This is a really good move. I love this move. A knight retreat. The knight on f6, although it looked fine, is actually going to be more useful on c5. And the bishop will come out to g5. That's the most important thing. The bishop will come to g5. And because white's dark squared bishop is basically on a block diagonal, the bishop on g5 is a very strong piece. So rook fd1. And I put a question mark here because I think Hikaru didn't realize just how dangerous this bishop g5 idea is. I'm not sure if he even saw it, but I mean, it looks like a pretty straightforward plan. Maybe Hikaru thought that after something like knight c5, then he can play, queen g4, attack e6. Maybe there was something here, but it's really not that clear. So bishop g5 was played. This looks very strong, and rook d3 was played. Just to, the rook gets hit and it has to move. And black's bishop is suddenly in the game. And it's controlling very vital squares. It's controlling d2, it's controlling e3, f4, and it's not easy for white to untangle here. White's only good piece for real is actually the knight on g6, which is actually shooting blanks. It's not really looking at anything vital. So b5 was played, again, a really good move. The point is that if this is taken, then rook c2 comes. And you cannot block with rook d2 because the bishop is beautifully placed on g5. So a very strong move, b5, a very nice pawn sacrifice. It's not even a sacrifice, really, because black will just regain all the material with some interest. So bishop a3 was played. Now, the point of this is that, if you take this, then rook d6 is very annoying. So the d6 pawn is hanging in this case. So d5 was played here. Now, I don't know if d5 was a good move here. I think Duda missed his chance to completely crush Hikaru by playing b4 first, just getting this bishop off this diagonal. And after something like bishop b2, a4 is extremely strong because this cannot be taken. After this, black will just win the c4 pawn. He'll win the pawn back, and these pawns are very weak. White's pieces are doing nothing. they cannot coordinate either, because all of these squares here are covered. And also the c2 square is under attack. And if black gets to enter the second rank, white is completely lost here, which he is lost here. But this bishop combination with the battery here is very tough to defend against. So instead of this, if, for example, if white did something else, let's say instead of taking, if he tried rook g3 first, then this could be taken, and after rook a6, suddenly black switches to the a file and will enter in via a2. And there's really no way to counteract this. You can try rook a1 here, but that won't really do anything, because after this, basically black can play something like queen a7, and this is a very annoying position to play. Bishop f4 might come, the knight will hop in on c5, not bishop f4 immediately because the knight is covering the square, but it's just a very difficult position for white to hold, because this rook is doing nothing. The back rank is a little bit exposed, so is the second rank, and if you look at black's king and compare it with white's, I'd actually argue that black's king is a bit safer, because there's no attack going on the black king. In the meantime, black's pieces are ready to activate, and the rook may come here. You know, it's actually very hard for white to find a good plan here. This bishop is so powerful, and this bishop looks very useless. This bishop is actually dead, because it can't even reroute. If something like bishop b2, just queen a2, and again, you just enter the second rank. Very strong position for black. So that was the plan that I think Duda missed here. He should have played b4, and that would have been a very strong idea, followed by a4. Instead of this, he played d5, and I think he rushed it here. Because here it looks like, for a moment, wow, okay, you get your rook on the second rank. It looks really strong. The a2 pawn is weak. The second rank is finally black's. His bishop is beautiful. Looks really strong. But Hikaru found a really good move here, bishop d6. And I think Duda missed this because he thought here for like 7 minutes. So I think he missed just how much of a good defense this is. Basically, the idea is that if queen takes, obviously queen takes rook. So something else has to happen. Now, if, for example, queen c8, which avoids this, it looks like black is still doing fine here, but then white can just play queen e1. And what has black really achieved here? Suddenly, the center pawn is weak. If this is taken, you just take it. Look at this. White pieces are actually liberated. The bishop on d6 in combination with the knight look very annoying. And you could argue that the bishop on d6 is just as strong as the bishop on g5. It's just a very... White has freed himself, and, you know, the second rank is nothing because black doesn't have any pieces to follow up with any sort of attack. So this is not working. So Duda decided to just take the queen, and this was taken. And now knight c5. And here Hikaru, I think he did some really good calculation. He played d6, basically giving up the exchange. But the point is that it creates so much counterplay for white that it's actually worth doing this, because this knight is a great defender. So let's see what happens if black takes this. If this is taken, d7 comes. The rook cannot move here because this will just be taken. Okay, so what about rook a8, let's say? Now I'm just following along with the computer. If something else, like, it's hard to actually find there's no move here, by the way. I mean, all these squares are covered. So you have to play rook a8, which looks really dumb. And after this is taken, and you could take the a pawn, but white's pieces in combination with this passed d pawn are so powerful that black can actually not shut down white's initiative here. Like, for example, if king f8 to try and come near the pawn, f4 is a very strong move. This cannot be taken because of d8, queening. So bishop f6, and now knight g6, you can kick the king back. The king cannot move here, and it's just not working. If king f7, you can actually just queen here, and after this, you probably have to give up material. Maybe not this. A4, but this is again a computer variation, very hard to see what to do here. So it's actually understandable why Duda didn't enter this, because it gets very complicated, and it's very hard to sort out just how black is supposed to untangle. So knight d7 instead was played, but this is a losing move. But again, if he went for knight takes d3, he would have to deal with the consequences of d7, and this gets very tricky and complicated. So he played knight d7, blocking the pawn. And for the moment, it looks like black is actually okay here, because it looks like the a pawn is hanging. These rooks are actually behind a pawn that they can't push, and the bishop is just sitting there. Okay, so bishop takes a5, rook takes a2, and now bishop b4, really good move. It looks natural to play something like b4. You know, it looks like, okay, well, I'm covering the queening square, but actually this bishop is completely inactive now. And the rook can switch across. Rook c2 is a really strong move. Covering the c file, and now white's pieces look pretty bad because these rooks are doing nothing. The knight is once again not shooting at anything, and there's no way to push the pawn without going on the c file. So that is why instead of b4, he played bishop b4, which is a really good move. Bishop d8 was played. Now maybe, well, if rook c2 is played, then just rook c3, and this is the point now. The rooks can challenge this rook on c2 with the bishop on b4. So bishop d8 was played, and I think this was intended to cover c7. Rook c3 anyways. Rook c8 might be threatened. Rook c7 might be threatened. White can probably just give the exchange to push the pawn one square more. Bishop b6, and now king h2. And I gave this an exclam because this is actually a pretty good move. It's a nice trick. It looks like f2 is hanging. Okay, so what happens if bishop takes f2? Well, now rook c7. That seems pretty obvious. If rook d8, rook c1, and white is just winning here. There's no way to stop the threat of rook c8, and maybe rook c7 follow up with the other rook, and, you know, white's going to collapse here. Knight e7 check is coming. Not white is going to collapse. Black is going to collapse, excuse me. Okay, what if rook takes f2? We're still covering c7. Rook c7 anyways. This cannot be taken because, again, if you take, there's just nothing that black can do here. Rook d8 is coming, and you can just take this, and then knight e7 comes, you queen, and you're up a piece against the knight. So that should be winning. So it's not working, so you can't really take that pawn. It's a poisoned pawn. But this also steps out of the way of the back rank. It avoids any checks, and I think this is just a really good move. Very calm. He didn't rush anything. King h7. It's funny how Duda copied him. Also getting off the back rank, but now there are some tricks when the king is on h7 because, you know, in some cases, knight f8 might be a fork, and we'll see what happens in the game. So f3, just removing the possibility of even allowing bishop takes or rook takes. And now rook a7. The rook comes back to defend just to cover c7 some more. And rook c6, a very calm move. And now bishop e3 was played here. If something else was played, let's say this. Now this move is very strong. You cannot take this because this is taken, and suddenly when you get rid of this dark squared bishop, this bishop is a lot stronger because you can play maybe d7, bishop e7 at some point. This bishop is very useful to cover the d8 square. So that is the idea. White just wins a pawn there, wins his pawn back, I'm guessing, and just starts to queen. Or, excuse me, I'm pretty sure that the pawns are equal now. But anyway, so bishop e3 was played to avoid that threat. And now bishop d2, just trying to exchange off that bishop. And now the bishop goes back. If this is exchanged, well, now everything is good because the rook is on the second rank. There's no counterplay. The rook is still on c6. Rook c2 is coming. Rook c7 is coming. There's really no way to stop the threat of playing rook c7 or rook c2. And black has nothing here. He can't keep playing. He'll just lose. The d6 pawn is way too strong. So that's why Duda refused to exchange. Bishop c3 again insisting, and we get a repetition of moves, and rook c7 comes. Of course, this cannot be taken, because if this is taken, there's really no way to stop this pawn and save the knight. If you try something like knight f6, rook d8 just wins on the spot. So rook a e8. I'm guessing he's trying to find some sort of counterplay with this. And now king h3, a really good move, and I'll show you why why he played that. So, for example, if white were to take this pawn here, then bishop f4 is just saving black because the knight will be won. So that's the point of king h3. Just a very short explanation for that. King h3 just avoids bishop f4 check, and now this pawn is actually on free. So b4 was played, distracting the bishop. Now, really another good decision by Hikaru. He took the b pawn. He could have taken this pawn, but notice how now black will actually get some counterplay after rook a5. And suddenly you could see how he's hitting the h pawn. The king is actually he's going to encounter some checks. And I think Hikaru realized that this is just not worth it. It's much better to just clear the game in a clean way. So he played bishop takes b4, which avoids any sort of tricks like that. Again, the rooks cannot enter anywhere here, so this pawn is safe. This pawn's still a weakness. This knight is actually very well placed. It's covering a lot of squares. Rook b8, and now bishop c3. This was taken. And now rook c8, and white is threatening mate in 1. This has to be avoided, so rook b8 was played. The rook took, and now d7. And there's no way to win here. And here Duda resigned. So the point is that after this, you can just take this because da-da, the king on h7 is really poorly placed. So that is why he resigned, because there's no way to actually capture this pawn and stop it from, or stop it from queening. If something like knight c6, you can actually just queen anyways, and white has this unstoppable threat of mate. There's nothing that black can do here. You can start giving away pieces with rook a8. So that is why Duda resigned. But what a game from Hikaru. He found a really good resources to hold here. Let's just go through it one more time. So the opening was a knight orf, and here he played this interesting move, knight h4, with the idea to just take on e6. He got rid of black's castling rights very easily, and then played very soundly. Just brought his pieces over, and slowly started to gain some space. And it did look like he was actually in some sort of shaky situation here, because black looked like he was reorganizing. And then it looked like at the moment it seemed like Hikaru was in some trouble after knight d7, preparing bishop g5. He found some really interesting moves to save himself here. I mean, b5 is very strong. And it wasn't easy to react to this, so bishop a3 was played. And now, he had to find this idea with bishop d6. So really nicely played by Hikaru. If this resource was not available, he probably would have lost. And then figuring out that he can actually give the exchange here, and that if black took, it would be a very complicated game for him to hold. Just creating these issues out of nowhere in a position where he was probably worse. And then he really capitalized on black's mistakes here in converting his advantage, and just slowly started dominating the position. He entered the 7th rank. Well, the 6th rank first, excuse me. Created threats, and once he entered the 7th rank, the game was basically over. I mean, just the way that he created these issues is incredible. From a position that, just outright looks really bad. If we go back right here, this position looks horrible, because this is coming, everything is coordinated, this king is actually pretty safe, so it just really well played by Hikaru. But yeah, so that's the tournament. Nepo is actually the winner. There's no one who can tie with him or beat him or do anything. He drew today. So if we look at the final standings, I will cover the next round tomorrow. Maybe someone will play a really good game. But yeah, so the final standings for this round, Nepo on 9 out of 13, an incredible score. I believe he had like 5 wins and the rest are draws. Hikaru with 7.5 out of 13 after his win today. Ding on 7. Rajabov and Caruana are on 6.5. Rapport is on 5.5. And Duda and Firouzja are on 5 out of 13. So congratulations to Nepo for winning the Candidates Tournament. I'm really excited to see what Magnus says about competing in the World Championship. It would actually be kind of interesting to see Nepo and Nakamura go at it. So yeah, I'll see you in the next round, and we'll finally conclude this amazing tournament. All right, thank you.